Today the Word Nerds are talking about villains, specifically giving you some examples of villains we just could not get enough of. Hello Word Nerds! Today we are getting together and giving you some examples of villains that we think have worked really well in stories we've enjoyed in the past, in hopes it'll give you a jumping off point for some research or some examples of how villains can work well in case you want to take any of that for your own stories. So I'm going to reach a little bit out of the box to kick things off with The Martian by Andy Weir. This is an adult sci-fi story set in the near future where an astronaut is stranded on Mars by himself and has to survive for a while on his own using only the supplies he has on hand, eventually working together with Earth in order to try to get himself home. So because the villain in this one isn't a specific person, it is just kind of nature working against man, which is something I don't see all that often anymore. I really wanted to just jump into it a little bit because there were so many great ways that you were rooting for this character against a force that wasn't being controlled by anyone evil or with any malicious intent. Sometimes it was just bad luck, sometimes it just wasn't being clever enough, and all of the characters had to come together in order to figure out how to solve this problem together. No one person could have done it on their own, which I thought also made a great kind of alternate to a villain, because there was no just one hero, one villain. It was kind of all of humanity working together to defeat this force that just didn't always do what you wanted it to, which I thought was really interesting.
One of my favorite villains is President Snow from the Hunger Games trilogy. I love those shades of gray villains where you hate them but you kind of want to like them and you understand their motives really well and kind of sympathize with them sometimes. President Snow is not one of those villains. He is a terrible person. He sends children to die every year. He threatens Katniss's family if she doesn't cooperate with him. He is very black and white, but at the same time, he's still a very dynamic villain. He's still really interesting, and he doesn't just feel like some sort of caricature, mustache-twirling evil guy. He's also just a well-matched antagonist for Katniss's protagonist. He is kind of a foil for her, where he is this old man who has all of the established political power, and she's a young girl who has the power of the people growing behind her. And even though he doesn't make that much of a physical presence in the books, he's always off in the capital. Katniss only interacts with him a few times. He's always this overhanging, sinister presence throughout the story. Katniss can feel him kind of hovering over her, and as a reader, you can too. You're always worried about what he could do next.
I always say I love a book with a good morally gray villain, and Serpent and Dove is one of those. Morally gray characters are often very complex, and though you know that Reed Diggory isn't on the good guys team almost right away, you also can see that he's no mustache twirling villain that just loves to do evil for the sake of evil. I think the most compelling antagonists are those that see themselves as righteous or noble, and the witch hunters in Serpent and Dove certainly fit that description. Reed, however, shows a rare thoughtfulness and potential for compassion that flies in the face of his upbringing, and that makes him kind of a wild card. You never know during the course of the book if he's going to go one way or the other, and that makes things very interesting.
So I am going to be a little bit of a rebel, and instead of talking about a villain from a book that I really like, I'm going to talk about a villain from a TV show that I really like. One of my favorite villains ever written is Thomas Barrow from Downton Abbey. Now, if you're not familiar with Downton Abbey, the biggest reason I like him as a villain is he's a sympathetic character. I love villains that are not just evil. I like villains that there's depth to them, and calling him a villain is not even the correct term. He's a misunderstood antagonist that is the cause of most hardships in the show.
One of the villains that I read relatively recently that I ended up really enjoying were the villains in Hexed by Michele Chris. This book is about like witches and sorcerers, and it's fun. And the sorcerers in this were diabolical. This book is super fun and lighthearted and just like a really good time to read. But there's a scene in here where the villains like go ham for the main character. And it was a lot, and it was such a weird tone shift, but it worked, and I loved that it went as dark as it did. Yeah, I think the fact that the book maintained its lighthearted energy, but the villains were as crazy and dark as they were was a really nice balance, and it made this really, really fun to read.
One of my favorite villains ever goes to the Kommandant, Karis from An Ember in the Ashes by Saboteur. Ooh, I thought she was hardcore in the first book, and then you get into like the second book, and then you get into the third book, and you're like, girl, you have some problems, and therapy ain't gonna help you at this point. I love her because she is so unapologetically cruel, and if she needs to get something, she's damn well gonna get it. If you stand in her way, you'll be dead. She has no qualms about killing. She's not gonna lose any sleep over doing whatever it is she needs to do to get what she wants, and that is terrifying. This chick went and led like 2 revolutions, basically just like butchered everybody. There's a lot of blood, and then she like tortures a couple people to death, and you're like, oh, that's I mean, bad, like, alright. But then you find out that she literally just had a baby, so that baby could grow up, and then she could just use it to like control a bunch of other people, and I'm like, my lord, wow, lady, just calm down. Even if you see such a driven villain trying to get what they want and being evil, you keep wanting to see these moments that make them human or that make them sympathetic, or a moment that you can somewhat see what they're going for. And in this one, you just can't. She wants power and she's going for it. This series deserved a strong villain, and she is, like, she makes me question if Saboteur is okay.